Hey everybody, hope you're doing well and that midterm went well. What we're going to be going over this week is client-side scripting. Now, this, if you have done web development in the past, is something that is probably second nature to you at this point. If you have never done this before, then welcome to JavaScript. Basically, what this is a way to get your web pages to be a little bit more accessible, a little bit more dynamic in nature, and kind of get away from that static, you know, waiting for the user to click a button to do anything type of vibe that we usually get from websites. Yeah, so let's dive right into this then. And as a forewarning, I'm going to have several links in here to JS Fiddle. These were created by Dr. Engelsma a few years back. And rather than recreating them myself and, you know, doing the exact same thing with maybe different wording, I figured I'd link you to his because they still work just fine, honestly. And the concepts really haven't changed too much in terms of straight JavaScript anyway. Obviously, there's, a lot of improvements and things that have changed over the years, but it's just a little bit of a forewarning there. So, to kind of basically outline what we're going to go over here, we'll go over a touch of the history because, again, the web has significantly evolved since its inception to where we are now, and the ability for us to have nice client-side interactions has also significantly improved. And this kind of relates with browser capabilities, with standards, and how browsers actually will support these various languages. So what we're basically going to be covering is the DOM, which we'll define momentarily, JavaScript, and then jQuery. And then interestingly, this is going to lead us into Node.js, into React, and things of that nature. So why do we do this? Why do we care? Most of our web pages in general are pretty static in nature so far, right? So we have defined Rails applications, you've done responsive frameworks, you've done all kinds of different things where by and large you define the page and nothing happens after it loads, right? I know a handful of you had like dynamic time tickers on one of the last assignments where I asked you for the hour, minutes, and seconds, and actually saw the seconds ticking, and that was pretty neat. Wasn't required, but it was definitely pretty neat. What's happening there is the page is dynamically updating. So HTML and CSS are static in nature, meaning that we have our web page defined, right? We have our HTML, our head, body tags, divs, and paragraphs, and all that fun stuff in between. That gets rendered, and then that is set in stone until we refresh. Cascading style sheets are going to be the same. Now, you might say, well, you can do animations in CSS and things like that. That's definitely cool. But that is still something that's kind of static in nature. Just as a bit of an aside, if you want to do CSS animation, look into keyframing and things of that nature, and you can get really cool animated background effects. But again, that's set in stone. That's not something we're really modifying. If you want the page to change, if you want the site to interact with the user, either the user has to refresh the page or the page has to refresh itself, right? And that is something that we haven't really talked about that latter point yet, but it is technically possible for us to inject refreshing code into a page. And the user refreshing the page, this is them interacting, right? They're clicking a submit button. They're clicking a hyperlink to go somewhere else. Things are changing based on user interaction. So to kind of hint at a little bit of the historical perspective here, for the user interaction, obviously we click something, page changes, life goes on. Maybe we redirect to ourselves with form data or something of that nature. But the more interesting approach is the dynamic temps. So we could do one of two things here. We could have the page refresh itself. So we basically add a meta tag to a web page. And we say, okay, so this is a refresh action. Content equals 5, semicolon, URL equals some link. And then after 5 seconds, the page will refresh itself. You could also send an HTTP header. So if I basically make a PHP page, for instance, where I can define the headers, or whatever language you're using, you can update the headers on the page. Well, we put this in and it will refresh itself. So to kind of give you a, 1 second. Sorry, I had closed my Visual Studio Code after class and I forgot to turn it back on. This is some WebGL code for my graphics class, not related whatsoever, but I just wanted to show you this meta thing. So if I were to say, add in this meta tag here, so I'm in my HTML, let's add in meta, HTTP equiv equals refresh, and content equals 5, URL equals, let's just go to cis.gvsu.edu. I'll let you go to that YouTube link on your own time if you want. Highly worth it. And then we've got basically our HTML code here. And yeah. So if I now go to this page, it's going to be, some WebGL stuff. How exciting and fun. All right. Life is good. And then, oh, well, the page changes. And I did put it in the right one. I keep forgetting our server is like super slow for some reason. I didn't click anything to make it go to this location, right? I am clicking buttons to play around with my WebGL application. Look how, neat perspective view is for our 3D objects. And then after 5 seconds, poof, page refreshes itself. So that's one way that we could actually handle that. Let me undo this very quickly so that I don't have that there next time for my other class. So one way that we can refresh a page. This leads us into an area of the web called dynamic HTML or DHTML. This was something that was hugely popular. I don't have an exact date, but it's early to mid 2000s. I remember this being really interesting and kind of one of the next big things. And it's probably slides back into the late 90s too, if you look into the history. Not super important, just kind of a nice historical viewpoint. What this is a collection of services, of plugins, of meta tags or headers that basically give us interactivity without needing to write, or wait for refresh commands, things like that. JavaScript comes into play here too, but it wasn't as well featured. For the longest time, JavaScript was not a good language. Still isn't, but that's a different discussion. Interesting. Cool. My page refreshed itself. I don't remember telling it to do that or putting in a meta tag. Anyway, fun little glitch. So if you you can actually probably search for Dhtml plugins. It was pretty popular with things like those like animated backgrounds, like there was JavaScript mouse trails, JavaScript snowflakes, things like that. Form interactivity, things of that nature. Basically, for a while, DHTML was the search term that you would use to find these things. And just for funsies, I didn't do this ahead of class, so I don't know what we're going to see. DHTML. Tutorial. No, examples. Let's do examples. Okay, so it does still exist, which is good. But if I zoom in a bit here, okay, well, let's handle some events. Let's play around with our text. So if I want like a tooltip, blinking header, delightful. See some JavaScript code here that's making this happen. Basically, this is one way to foster interactivity of their sites. The reason why is that if a site is just static in nature, it's not strictly exciting for the user, right? It's kind of boring, not real usable, and basically it's just sitting there, which is great if you're just presenting text, but if you want a user experience, it's not going to be very good. So this leads us to a slightly different area, and the term Ajax kind of comes along. Now, this is something fostered by JavaScript, and it's basically a way for the client and server to talk to each other. This is one way that we can basically update a page without having to click a submit button, talk to the server, get a response back. basically JavaScript or whatever scripting language you would use for this would fire off a request, talk to the server would send a response back via this Ajax call, and it would just kind of magically update on the page without you clicking a button or without you basically refreshing the page is kind of the key takeaway. So this GIF that I've got here, okay, so there's a form, somebody selecting something, and then a pop-up magically occurs. And this is being populated from the server. And just to kind of set the stage here and, set context, when we are rendering a web page, the server will do something first, right? So your Apache server, your IIS server, whatever server you're running, will handle the request. It'll route you to the particular page that needs to be rendered, send it to the browser, renders whatever you need to see, page load's done, right? And if we want new content, we have to refresh, which means that request response type of transaction. Ajax breaks that, and it basically says, okay, the page has loaded. Now I effectively have a socket connection between client and server where we can just kind of talk in parallel to this page being loaded. So this is kind of the magical things changing on the page without needing to reload happening here. And what we're going to kind of end with here is we're going to talk JavaScript in the next video, but DHTML and why I kind of highlighted Ajax here, technically we are still waiting for a request and response from the server to update things. So with Ajax, I might click something and I would kind of surreptitiously under the hood say, hey, server, I need new data, send me something back. DHTML means that everything is loaded and in memory, we are just kind of fudging things. We're updating values, we're updating parameters, but we're not getting any new data from the server. If we want that, we need to do an entire refresh to get new things. Where this kind of changes historically is that, people are saying, okay, DHTML, that's great. Ajax, okay, that's also a good thing. We need a nice library to make this all happen. And again, if you have web experience, you probably have heard the library, you probably have heard of the Jquery library. And if you haven't, it's one of the more popular JavaScript frameworks out there for doing interaction, for doing Ajax calls. There's an entire interface design area for it. Basically, it's a lot of usability types of things packaged together in one nice library. And it's very easy to use, very easy to include, and we'll look at that, in a couple of videos from now. But at least for now, be aware that all of this client-side scripting business means that we have data loaded in from the server. We're going to write some kind of a scripting language, pretty commonly these days JavaScript, to actually facilitate this. So in the next video, we'll get into JavaScript syntax, we'll get into the DOM, and after that, we'll do some jQuery and then some fun examples. Anyway, hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one.